Hi, my name is Sarah, and I work with the Alabama Coastal Foundation. And today I would like to invite you to participate in our special in-home edition of our Water Festival. The purpose of the Water Festival is to help you have fun learning by providing hands-on opportunities that help you to understand the importance of water, conservation, and the environment. Today I'm going to show you how to do our water filtration activity. This activity will let you gain an understanding about the importance of keeping water clean by experimenting with a variety of materials to filter various pollutants. The estimated time to accomplish this should be about 20 minutes. You can find a printable version of the instructions on our website at www.joinacf.org. And now it's time to get started. The entire activity will consist of 8 steps. Step 1. Let's begin by thinking about how we use water. How do you use water? For starters, you probably take a bath or a shower every day. Hopefully, you wash your hands frequently. You brush your teeth twice a day. And of course, you drink water. You can't live without clean water. And that's why it's so important to understand how water gets contaminated. It's important that you understand what contaminants and pollutants are. A contaminant is anything that gets into the water that doesn't belong there, like garbage, sewage, animal waste, dead animals and plants, runoff from roads and parking lots, fertilizer runoff, and oil from boats on the water. If those contaminants are harmful to us, we call them pollutants. Can you think of some ways that contaminants get into your water at your home? There are all sorts of ways for contaminants to get into our water. But once it's there, how do we remove it? Filters are one way we can remove contaminants. There are all sorts of filters. You probably have several in your home. Have you ever seen a pool filter? Pool filters catch leaves that get into your pool. You might have seen a sink filter. This prevents small objects from falling down the drain. Have you ever used a tea filter before? Maybe you've seen a drain like this in your neighborhood. This is a storm drain. It prevents large sticks or other objects from falling into the drain during a heavy rain. There are many kinds of filters. Look around your house to see what filters you can find. Now that you understand the importance of clean water, how contaminants get into the water, and how filters can be used to remove contaminants, or at least some of them, let's move on to step 2. In step 2, we're going to gather materials for the activity. First, you're going to need a spoon or something to stir with. You're going to need a container that holds at least 16 ounces to hold your clean water sample. It's preferable to use something that's transparent so that you can see as you add contaminants to the clean water. It's best to use a clear plastic pitcher. I didn't have a plastic pitcher, so I used a glass vase. If you use glass, be very careful and only use it if your parents are with you. Next, you will need 4 clear plastic cups. We will use these cups with our 4 filters. And now it's time to gather our contaminants. For this activity, we're not going to use any materials that would actually be harmful to you. We're going to find substitutes for the contaminants listed here. Contaminant number 1 is litter. Instead of litter, we're going to use Fruit Loops or Cheerios or some other kind of cereal. Contaminant number 2 is dirt. Well, dirt is pretty easy to find. I just got some out of my garden in my backyard. The third contaminant is oil. And for this activity, just find whatever oil you have in your kitchen. And this oil can represent all cooking oils as well as motor oils and any other type of oil that might get into our waterways. Our fourth contaminant is fertilizers. Fertilizers can be anything from your manufactured fertilizer for your lawn or garden. It could also be animal waste or sewage overflow. To represent fertilizer, I used a tea bag. I opened up the tea bag and poured the contents into clean water. Our fifth contaminant is cleaning products. For cleaning products, think about all the soaps, shampoos, conditioners, surface cleaners, etc. that you use when cleaning yourself and your house, because a lot of these products go straight into our water system. To represent cleaning products, we're going to use vinegar instead of water. Use vinegar and add some kind of food coloring to it. Now, you may not have the traditional food dye, so instead, you can use other things. I used a drink mix, but it's purple. You could also use Kool-Aid or some other kind of drink mix. Something that has a color to it. At this point, you should have collected something to represent all of our 5 contaminants. And remember, you don't have to use exactly the same things that I did. Just use something that's similar. Now it's time to gather our water filters. Now the purpose of this is to find different kinds of materials with different size pores in them, or holes, to let the water go through. The idea here is to test how different types of materials can filter water. The filters we're going to be using today are a coffee filter, a strainer, gravel, and cheesecloth. Now, you may not be able to find these exact materials in your house, but that's okay. Just use whatever substitute you can find that's similar. For our first filter, we're going to use a coffee filter. If you don't have a coffee filter, use a paper towel or some kind of material that allows water to go through but is not very porous. As you can see in the picture, I have fastened the coffee filter to a small cup with a rubber band. If you don't have a rubber band, then you can use a string, some other material, or you can ask your parents to hold it for you. When you fasten the coffee filter to the cup, make sure that you have a deep enough indentation in the center to hold water, because coffee filters strain water very slowly. Our second filter is a strainer. You may not have a strainer that looks exactly like this, but you can find something similar. For example, you can use a juice strainer or a tea strainer. You could also possibly use the filter for the sink that we saw earlier in the video. Just use something that has similar sized pores. Our third filter is gravel. Now, I recommend that you use clean gravel from a fish tank or something similar. You could use small rocks that you can find in your yard if that's an option. Of course, you need to clean them off first. I happen to have these small glass pebbles. As you can see in the picture, I placed my pebbles or gravel into the strainer. Now, our fourth filter is cheesecloth. I didn't have any cheesecloth, so I had to find a substitute. Now, in order to find a substitute, I had to think of something that would have a similar porous quality to the cheesecloth. I could have used a loosely woven cloth. I thought about using a cotton ball and stretching it over the top of the cup to fasten it. But then I found gauze in my first aid kit. It was the one thing that seemed most similar to cheesecloth. Now that you've collected all 4 of your filters, the coffee filter, strainer, gravel, and cheesecloth, or something that's similar to those things, it's time to move on to step 3. In step 3, we're going to add the contaminants into our clean water. First, get your large container with your clean water in it. As you add each contaminant, make sure you add enough so that it's easy to see them in your clean water, and so that you have enough to distribute through all 4 of your filters. Now you add your first contaminant, in this case, the litter or Fruit Loops. Add enough to at least cover the top of the water. If you need to add more later, that's fine. Now take just a moment to think about how litter might get into our waterways. For example, if there's a plastic bottle on the side of the road and there's a heavy rain, that plastic bottle might be washed into one of our drains, into a stream, into our rivers, and our bay. Next, we're going to add our dirt. I recommend dropping in at least 2 good-sized pinches. Dirt might get into our waterways from a construction site. You can see from the picture that our once clean water now has dirt floating around in it. Now it is time to add the oil. Pour about 2 capfuls of oil onto your water. Now look closely at the top. Do you see the oil floating at the top? When oil builds up, it can clog drains and sewer lines. That's why it's important to recycle your oil properly. And now it's time to add our fertilizer. If you remember, I made my fertilizer contaminant with a tea bag. You can see that the water is a little bit darker and that there are tea leaves floating around. Do you remember how fertilizers get into our waterways? Think about the fertilizers that we use in our gardens and on our lawns. When it rains heavily, or rains at all, water runoff can carry those fertilizers into our waterways. Now let's add our final contaminant. We mix together vinegar and food coloring to represent cleaning products. Pour a couple of ounces of this solution into your water. You can see here that our water changes color just slightly. The solution I used to represent cleaning products was purple, so it's a little bit hard to tell. If you can't see much of a difference in the color, try smelling it. Can you smell the vinegar? Let's just think for a moment about the quality of this water. Would you want to swim in this water? Or even fish in it? It certainly isn't clean enough for drinking. And that is precisely why we need a way to filter our water. Now let's move on to step 4. In step 4, we will pour our contaminated water through each of our filters. Stir the contaminants before you pour each sample. For each sample, very carefully pour about 3 to 4 ounces. We'll start with the coffee filter because it takes a long time for the water to go through. Pour your sample over your coffee filter and allow it to sit for a few minutes. Now pour a sample through the strainer. We can see from the picture that some of the oil, dirt, and fertilizer made it through the strainer. The strainer caught all of the litter and some of the tea leaves. Once we're done using the strainer by itself as a filter, you can rinse the strainer out and add the gravel to create your next filter. Then pour your sample contaminated water over the gravel. We can see in the image that the fertilizer, our cleaning products, and some of the oil made it through the gravel pretty easily. When we take a look from overhead, it's clear that the glass pebbles that I used to represent gravel didn't quite do a great job, but they did manage to catch the litter and some of the fertilizer. And finally, let's move on to our gauze filter. Instead of gauze, you may have used cheesecloth or a cotton ball or perhaps a loosely woven cloth. Now pour your sample contaminated water over this filter. You can see in the image of my experiment that a little bit of oil got through, but not as much as with the strainer and with the gravel. And from the color of the water that came through the filter, it's clear to see the fertilizer and cleaning products did get through. Now take a good look at the top of the filter. This filter definitely caught the litter, and I think a good deal more of the fertilizer too. And it looks like it caught a little bit of the dirt. Now let's see how this compares to our first filter, the coffee filter. Remember how I said it took the coffee filter a long time to drain? Well, it's been sitting for about 5 minutes. The color of the filter water appears much lighter than the others, doesn't it? Now let's take a good look at the top of the filter. Clearly, none of the litter made it through, and almost all of the oil is still in the filter. Behind the litter and the oil, you can tell it's pretty dark, and there are tea leaves and dirt. It looks like our little coffee filter did a pretty good job. If you remove the filter and then smell the filtered water, you can still smell the vinegar, which represents our cleaning products. Now let's compare all of our results. You don't want them to get mixed up, so it's a good idea to put a label on each one as you take the filters off. When you remove each filter, make sure you have a trash can close by. Then carefully remove each filter. Working from left to right, our first cup contains our gauze filtered water. Then we have our strainer and gravel. For the third one from the left, I used the strainer. And finally, there was the coffee filter. Which one of your filters did the best job filtering? Just observing the color of each sample, we can get an idea of how much fertilizer, dirt, and cleaning products got through the filter. To get a better idea of how much oil got through the filter, take a look at the top of each one of your samples. Which one of your samples has the most oil? While you're investigating the top of each sample, it's also a good idea to smell each one. Remember, we used both vinegar and food coloring to represent our cleaning products. So if you smell a lot of vinegar, that gives you a pretty good idea of how much of our cleaning products got through the filter. So which one of your filters did the best job? For me, it was the coffee filter. The coffee filter takes the gold. I would like to know how well your filters performed. Take a picture of your results and send them to us. You can email them to me at info@joinacf.org. You can learn more about water, wastewater, and stormwater through our Utilities United program. Just go to joinacf.org/UU. Thank you for joining us today at this special in-home edition of the Alabama Coastal Foundation's Water Festival Water Filtration activity.